right at the...
We're live now.
Okay, we're live now. Okay, good. Welcome online folks. We have a couple of agenda items today for bringing you Dr. Westley. The most important one is to share some of his experiences from the past semester, which is the first semester that he implemented some pretty neat innovations in his face-to-face course with a blended cohort of a couple of distance students. But also we wanted to talk with our local iTeach participants here on this end about the potential for Google Hangouts to bring experts into your community, into your face-to-face classroom, into your distance classroom, and sort of walk you through what that might feel like and look like. So right now, this session, Dr. Wesley's discussion is going to be broadcast via Google Hangouts on Air, which streams directly to the YouTube servers, which is then available live throughout the world. So it's a pretty neat, really astounding amount of power available to you as instructors these days. We are trying a new camera setup, which we always inevitably do, and we had a couple last-minute technical details. So we're checking sound and things. So just a brief frame what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Westley is the CITE Fellow. He was an iTeach a couple years ago, 2014.
March of some year.
Yeah, March 2014. Then he applied to be a Chancellor's Innovation Technology Education Fellow and was one of the lucky recipients of that program. And so then Dan and I and Janine worked with Dr. Westley to put together, to address some aspects of his course that he thought were lacking. And so we were really excited, and we've had a great time working with him. Not only were there some pedagogical and sort of learning innovations, but there were some pretty significant administrative innovations that his ideas required. So he can share those as well.
Very good.
So without further ado, take it away. Please ask questions. If someone asks a question, if you would repeat the question for the online viewer, that'd be great.
Very good.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the time to be here and share some of my experiences that are continuing to evolve. And it's sort of interesting to start already reflecting, given that grades were submitted yesterday, I guess. But what I wanted to do was, just give a brief overview of sort of what I tried to pull off this past term in a class that I called Salmon Society. It was offered at the 400 level as a special topics course to start. And some of the administrative things that Owen had mentioned right off the bat, some of the ideas that I was suggesting to try to pull off hit with some skepticism at some of the levels as it went through curriculum review. And so we sort of did a loophole and offered this as a special topics course rather than a trial course or anything like that. So there's always creative ways to try to still move forward, but it is always a challenge to be thinking about those hurdles with creative classes. So anyway, as background, so the class really started with a fact, and it's this, that when you ask Alaskans how much they value salmon, they rank their interest and love of salmon right behind the PFD and guns, right? I mean, it is just fundamental to Alaskans. And one of the things that's amazing about these critters is that they totally connect not only us, but they connect across ecosystems, they connect our economies, they connect our cultures, right? And so they have this incredible power to actually connect us, but also the conflicts that arise because of us as people and who gets the fish and some of the inequities. Really, salmon becomes and represents often wicked problems. So problems that really strike at personal values and butt up against economy and all kinds of stuff that's more than just sort of cool critters. So what I wanted to do was to create a class that taught students and sort of revealed some of these complexities of these issues about Pacific salmon. And being based in Alaska, it seemed like a really pertinent place to do this. So my idea was met with skepticism a bit because of two major things. So the first one was I wanted to create essentially a rolling list of guest experts from outside to talk about case studies. So I designed the class around 4 major case studies and spent multiple weeks on each of those cases. So we worked on issues of declining Chinook salmon in the Yukon River area, which is a continuing hot major issue for both management sides and for the folks that depend on those fish. We talked about the interaction between hatchery and wild salmon. It's also in Alaska, perhaps an elephant in the room that doesn't get talked about enough and probably should. We went outside of Alaska and looked elsewhere, looked to a place like the Sacramento River Basin where salmon functionally are there without rivers. So when the agricultural pumps are pumping water for the fields, the river actually flows upstream. It's undergone a whole host of major changes. So didn't want folks to only think about Alaska. And then we came back in the last section and talked about Cook Inlet issues and real poignant conflict between stakeholders in Cook Inlet. So issues between set netters and commercial fishermen and drift netters and sport fishermen and dip netters. It gets really, really complicated in a hurry in there. So we sort of finished with that topic. And so because I'm not an expert on all of those, I wanted to get the folks that were in the trenches working on these things, interacting with the students. And so the lecture portion of the class was literally, I think I only gave 4 lectures or something, but otherwise it was just a rolling series of guests that I was actually pretty proud to have chime in. They really were the experts in their fields. And so the skepticism was, well, how are you going to pull that off? That's going to be a technological nightmare with video conferencing. But our school, the School of Fish and Ocean Sciences, does this all the time. And so it actually went off largely without a hitch in terms of coordinating with the VCon service here, thinking about perhaps in the future using something like Google Hangouts. Maybe that would be an option. But anyway, we pulled that off. So that largely went without a hitch. And so students were able to interact in real time with guest experts. And there's a web page. So this was Janine and Owen. So a WordPress framed site for the course. You know, I'm sure I'm breaking all kinds of design rules of how it looks. But anyway, you can see the recorded lectures. You can see content and so forth that's sort of archived here for the students. So the other part of the class that met some skepticism in my department was my idea of having some hands-on learning in a laboratory section. And the idea was, well, you have distance students. How are you going to do that? Because we usually still think about labs as being white coats. You're going to do some titrations. What do you know, it's got to be hands-on. How are you going to do that? And so what did we do? And that's why I wanted to talk about it was a fun exercise. And the real core of what we did in the lab, the overarching purpose, a lot of what we were trying to do was realize that a lot of the conflicts that they were learning about in the lecture portion of the class, at the root of that is often a true lack of understanding of different user groups among each other. It's like essentially a lack of empathy. And so it's not a kumbaya lack of empathy. It's sort of the To Kill a Mockingbird type empathy. You got to walk around in someone's shoes for a while to understand it. So how do you try to get at some of those things? And the tool that I played with and experimented with was a role-playing game. And so the idea was that students in the class were going to be assigned different roles. And I'll show you how this sort of looked like in real time. But the way it worked was students had different roles. Behind the scenes, I was feeding students data from a sort of a mock fishery, sort of pulling data from a real fishery I'm familiar with, providing them data on how many fish are going upstream, and having someone play the role as a manager. So based on the numbers, they have to decide whether the fishery opens or closes. Other folks have to decide whether they're going to go fishing or not. I was feeding them information about the price of the fish, how much the cost of diesel, the size of the fish that were coming in this year, feeding them a whole lot of information. And they were, ideally, I was hoping that they were going to start understanding some of the constraints, conflicts that go into the decision-making process of the different users, right? To try to build some of that empathy. So the tool that we used to get at this was a free online tool. It's called Slack. I don't know if you guys have talked about it yet in iTeach as one of your tools. I've increasingly been using it actually for collaborations and other things I've been doing for science projects. And the students in the lab actually created and kept using this tool for some of their projects that I'll share with you in a bit. So in the lab, so what did this look like? So I can show a couple of just sort of examples here. So the idea again, so I was feeding them information and they were having to make decisions on how to respond to that information and so forth. So for example, I fed the person that was acting as the local manager information, and they had to write up a press release. I left it to them to spell things correctly, which sometimes they didn't, okay? So they had to put out emergency orders based on the information I was feeding, and then that the other folks with different roles had to respond to that information. So were they gonna go fishing? Were they not gonna go fishing? And then communicate to each other on this online sort of discussion forum. So the idea was really a role. They all had sort of background stories, a sort of a narrative of what were some of the pressures that their character that they were taking on was based on. And the students, some of them at least, really enjoyed, I could tell, running with it. So some students really got into it and so forth and had great conversations. I'll pull out, cherry pick some of the fun ones. Just a few students that really helped a lot. So Ben and Madeline were great. So Ben is a fisheries student, but just some of his fun stuff. So here he is. His role this season in this week of the class, he was the commercial fisherman. He had been the manager the week before. And so some of the fun stuff he's saying in this post, which I really enjoy, saying, "We're just back from our winter business down at LA Fashion Expo where none of our buyers quite knew what to make of our Shadowfax salmon leather lingerie line. So we'll have to chalk that experiment up with another failed investments. I don't think I'm done with my fashion career now." Anyway, so he goes on and he also pokes fun at what was his role the previous season as manager. So he's now the commercial fisherman and he's poking fun at how the manager last season had a really hard time and hadn't met the escapement and so forth. So some of these students really ran with this. And in the end, when you asked, so they would go through this for a week. So this would look like they would feed information, students would have to respond. I would iterate around that again. So another day you'd give more information, and it sort of worked its way out for a week. And at the end of the week, we sort of met together again and talked about, well, how did things go? What did you think? What emerged out of this? And most of the students, you could tell, did pull away some nuggets of sort of how their thinking had changed. One student, what was good for her was that her whole life view in real life had been focused on one area of Alaska where she thought the whole world looked like that. This was very different than that, so she broadened her understanding of some of these different user groups and some of the different management issues. She hadn't thought about these issues of, well, as a manager, it's hard to know how many fish are coming this year. Is it a big run? Is it a small run? Is it early? Is it late? If it looks big early, is it because it's a small run but it's early, but it's really a big run at the normal run timing? There's all these uncertainties that go into those decision-making processes for managers and so forth. And they clearly, at least some of them, hit on that. Other folks, I will totally say, when given what I would like them to do, if you say, here's your task, provide a comment, they did the bare minimum, right? So it's like, okay, here's what I want you to do. And this was a student that she was in Montana. She was actually more advanced. She was actually a law student, taking the course for 600 level. For her, you bare minimum, that's what she did. And I don't know if that was partly her personality. I think that was partly what was behind that. But I don't want to give a false impression that every student just went crazy with this. There was a mixture, but overall, I think it was a really interesting success. All right, so that was the role-playing game, and I'll give a little plug. So Marissa's not here, but Marissa eLearning, she just did a really nice short narrative about this experience, and it's posted on the UAF page. And I thought she really captured it well. So it's got some quotes from Madeline and Ben, folks that really seemed to like it and wanted to chat with her. So. Oh, Marissa, yeah. There you go. Marissa Carl, or has a, yeah. Right, so that was the role-playing aspect. The other part of the lab, so that was a couple of weeks, and we spent some time building up to this activity, and then we reflected some on it. The other half of the lab was time for the students to work on individual projects. They had the option of doing group projects, but it sort of evolved into being individual projects, which were fine. I thought I'd just share some of them. And one of the things that collectively, I guess together, the students realize is that there's not really one place, a good go-to place in Alaska for salmon information. And so I was inspired and helped the students, and again, with help from Janine. We've recently launched another site that has some of their information. So this is open for the world to see and to share. So this is now live, and it is also accompanied by a Twitter feed that the students are feeding me information that they want to be sharing. And so we've taken on a role of trying to communicate some of these salmon issues broadly. And we have all of 32 followers. So we are obviously having a huge impact. But you got to start somewhere. What's fun is the art emerged from a project from one of the students. So she was a biology student, but had a predilection for art. And so her project was to do some art that accompanied her paper in class. She was interested in climate change, salmon in the Arctic aspects with climate change. And so she did some art to accompany things. And I'd share some of that with you. I think it's really actually quite pretty. So both bald eagles and sockeye salmon don't currently exist in the Arctic yet, but I'm sure they're on their way. And the other one that really pulls at my heartstrings, I have some work on pike at the moment going on. This is a sort of an eerie picture of a skeleton salmon with an invasive aquatic plant in the foreground and a pike lurking in the background. So that was sort of fun. So the idea was these student projects were not necessarily hardcore science-based, but they were everything from art. The law student did a timeline on subsistence fishing in the state. Another student, I'll show you some of her work, which has been posted and shared. She was a rural student from Rampart on the Yukon. And what she did was she interviewed multiple folks that she knew across multiple generations, asked them about their connection to salmon, asked them about things, and then she summarized a lot of their comments as word clouds. And so you can skim through some of the word clouds across a couple generations, and sort of interesting at a very cursory level, kind of curious to see what falls out. But what is really interesting is that almost all of them, family and culture, sort of are right in the middle and are big. So the importance of salmon for this group of folks, which is what you would maybe expect, but it's sort of fun to see in real life. So anyways, those were some of the things that we tried to pull off this term. Grades were submitted yesterday. I'll call it a success. I'm still alive. And we're going to evolve and try it again next spring. It'll look different, but some will remain the same. And the current plan is to try to actually expand a bit on the role-playing narrative and actually say, okay, well, that was 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you can do a lot, but you actually can't build as much tension. You can't make it as rich. And so the idea is to actually try to draw it out a little bit longer and maybe go for actually half of the lab course could be this iterative sort of role-playing game. So that's what I've got. I'd love to have, no, you don't need to clap. You don't need to clap. Yeah, and maybe that's me not understanding. What do you mean?
I mean, the multi-listing course.
Yeah. So those were the hoops were that of the repeat the question was some of the challenges in setting up the course, and really the crux of the question is what emerged was the challenge of how to list a course potentially at multiple levels. So how do you decide? Are you forced to offer a course at a 400 level or a 300 level or a 200 level? It was really hard because the students that I got in the course embodied the fact that they were at multiple levels. They really were. They were a wide cross-section of students with different understanding and so forth. And so one of the challenges was the system was largely set up such that I had to decide what level to offer it as. And when I submitted the course paperwork, I originally offered it as a 200 level. I wanted it as a 200 level to be accessible to lots of students. And the curriculum committee said, no way, there's no way that a 200 level student would be able to interact with guest experts. This is far too advanced. they have too much reading to do, and some of it, you take those criticisms to heart. Some of it was probably fair, and some of it I think was absurd. And so anyway, this first offering, it was to get it going, was offered at a 400 level, but I think that came at the cost of more students that probably would have gotten a lot out of the course didn't take it because it was at a 400 level. At the same time, I had a law student at a 600 level who took it as an independent study at a 600 level for credit, and she wrote a paper that we're submitting to the Alaska Law Review from the class. So it is a broad cross section, and I would like to not have to be forced to only offer it at one level. It'd be fun to still be able to somehow embrace all of that. But of course, it does have challenges. So that was not really a great answer to how I dealt with it. It was just sort of, those were some of the hurdles that still need to get worked out. But I think there are creative models for offering courses at different levels. So we'll be exploring that. So that's some of the anticipated evolution of this course, I think. Yeah, I will.
So how did you organize the information that you gave to students in their respective roles? Did all the students see it?
Very good.
How did that work?
The short answer is, on this platform, yeah, so the question was, how did I organize the information and the narratives for the different roles in the game? Did all participants know each person's role and backstory? The short answer is no. I left it to the student to try to figure out how much they wanted to divulge, both in sort of explaining their, it sort of emerged in some of their narratives and so forth when they were interacting. But no, some students divulged more than others. But I didn't. And I think you could probably make a case to go either way of sharing it with everyone. But I went this route. So the roles came to the individual users in direct channels. So this platform allows you to give private messages to certain individuals, and you can feed them information that way. Oh, I'm in the wrong one here. But anyway, that's right. So for example, behind the scenes, I took on the role, this isn't updating at the moment, sorry, but I took on a role not as Professor Westley or whatever. It was a sort of ambiguous avatar role, and I was feeding information in a direct channel to the manager. So here are your numbers, left it to them to then put out a release, and then would then give a direct message to the individual users to say, you need to now respond to the emergency order that has come out by doing X, Y, or Z. So you can post a response on the VHF channel, you can write a newspaper article for the local newspaper, you can do X, Y, or Z. And then left it for them to figure out how much they wanted to run with it. Right? That was part of the task. And some students ran and some students drug their heels, I don't know, partly. But the other aspect that they did realize, and that was part of the game, is that certain individuals, based on their roles, had more to do and had more. And so the sport fishermen, they say, well, they had planned their trip to Alaska last year, they saved up their money, and they're going to come. If the fishery is not closed, you still are. And so the whole point was actually for them to realize, yeah, actually the manager in certain roles have more power than others. There's an inequity in that. And that actually causes some of the tension. Certain groups are like, what am I going to say? It's like, exactly, what are you going to say? But you still leave it for them to say something. Exactly. Yeah, Ellen.
How much time did you spend every day on this class?
Yeah, how much time did I spend every day on this class? Well, so there were, 9 contact hours a week. So that was just right off the bat. So is that right? 3, 6, I think so. Yeah. So I had a lab portion. Or 6, 4, I don't remember. I can't remember, it's a blur. I guess six contact hours. Is that right? Yeah. No, it was a 4 credit class. Yep. Yeah. It was highly variable. That's the answer. It was highly variable. When things like this were running and I was doing, it was fairly intensive. But other times you had guest experts coming to class, and there was a little bit of making sure the logistics went, and then showed a class that actually saved some time, right? And so it did not strike me as me spending more time on this class than some of my other even 3-credit classes, but it waxed and waned. So during this period when this was running, I was trying to be on this platform a lot to make it clear that the student should be there as well. Yeah.
There was a set time that you met. It was a live action class.
Right. So the question is, was there a sort of a synchronous timing, set timing for us to meet? And the short answer is yes. So this was a bit different than our typical, or maybe what a lot of what e-learning does in terms of having online classes that are not set times and are asynchronous. No, this was more of a face-to-face typical classical class, but had these online elements with students that were taking it from afar, so distant students. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you structure your expert guest speaking sessions? What bounds and instructions did you give to the experts, and what bounds and instructions did you give to the students?
So the question was, with a rolling schedule of guest experts, how did I coach them to that's a great question. What I tried to do always, especially for the seasoned scientists, or not trying to judge, but like the agency scientists, I tried to make it really clear about the width and diversity of the students. So I say, hey, it's great to show data, but I really want you to minimize how many data slides you show and take the time to really explain it, because it wasn't a 400 science class, even though it was listed in the fish department. So it was really that of just trying to continue to make sure that they understood their audience. And by and large, I think they did a pretty good job. But it didn't do away with the fact that if they're talking about some issue, that there's an underlying foundational knowledge that you kind of need to have, and some of the students didn't have it and some did, and so it was tough. It was tough. And so I think that's why in future years, offering potentially at a lower level and getting everyone up to speed, to have maybe the first couple weeks of the class is us getting up to speed. We all have this foundational understanding together, and then within that boundary, we can be talking about certain things. I think that's more fair, and I think that's the way it's going to evolve.
And so that the experts were coming with a prepared PowerPoint generally, and then the students were sparking discussion, or did it start with the students' interests, or like which was the motivating factor? So
the guests were all deeply involved in the case studies that I was spending time on. So Alaska Chinook salmon issues. So we had, she's now moved on, but we had the summer manager from Fish and Game. So she's the one that literally was making the decisions, open and closed, and how you deal with this. So Stephanie chimed in. And she brought a fairly nice level PowerPoint and shared it with students. But they did a good job, and I tried to help facilitate having the discussion throughout. It really was not just them projecting information and a couple questions at the end. It was an hour-and-a-half period, and it seemed to always evaporate. So even if a guest had 40 minutes worth of material. So, and all the lectures are online, or will be very soon. And so are archived, which is nice. So I'll be able to use some of that material in future years too, hopefully. Good question. It was a challenge.
Try and get to the front of the room so I can speak to Dr. Westley, the microphone.
Stick my chest in your...
Yeah. Just a couple of points about this project from a design perspective. Games, role-playing games in particular, have the advantage that they can be very engaging for students. You put students in the role of the professional that they're learning how to be. People have done that for a long time in counseling careers, in law careers that involve really complex human interactions. There's really no way you can tell people about a fishery manager's position, but putting them in the role of an actual fishery manager and having them at home at night stressing over whether to open or close. I mean, how else do you teach that experience other than to put them in the role of that type of activity? So that was sort of the inspiration behind our project here. And that inspiration stemmed from a role-playing exercise that we did at iTeach a couple years ago, And this afternoon, we're going to be doing another role-playing exercise, a slightly different one from the one that Dr. Westley experienced, but we've sort of shifted a little bit, and we're hoping you'll find that valuable and maybe something you'll consider employing in your teaching. So,
and I'll say too that one of the things that was, God, my battery is awful on this computer. Anyway, that one of the things I felt like e-learning does a really good job at doing is supporting and encouraging you to also push your own comfort level. So I'll say this. So I did iTeach. It wasn't Dan or Owen's fault, but we did a game, and it's realized that my personality, I really dreaded game night at home. I don't like games, and so I hated that. And so this actually was it was pushing my boundary of comfort as well. And so one of the things that I knew I didn't want to do was actually to make it a game, like there's winners and losers. That to me sets the wrong tone, right? It's like, okay, you're the commercial fisherman and this is deadliest catch and you win, you get the most. The best is the guy with the most or something silly. I didn't want to do that. But it pushed my own comfort and ended up in a place that I thought was really, for me too, inspiring, was this sort of narrative experience that had aspects of the gamification, but wasn't as contrived. But anyway, so I would encourage you to push your own comfort level too. Can be fun.
Work on that this afternoon and tomorrow and Friday. There's going to be going to keep ratcheting up the pushing you in directions that may be more and less comfortable.
Yep.
So that's intentional.
Enjoy the ride.
So thank you very much, Dr. Westley, for coming and
joining
joining us for lunch. We're going to shut off the broadcast, and we got about probably 10 minutes or so for you to do what you like to do, what you need to do. We're going to start with Kristen's session then about 12:50.
Awesome.
On track.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.